कि जो देश जिम्मेदार था हमारे देश पर बम धमाकों के लिए, हमारे देश पर एक तरीके से कोवर्टली हमला करने के लिए, उसके खिलाफ कड़े एक्शन नहीं लिए गए, बल्कि उनके प्रधानमंत्री को ये नहीं कहा गया कि आप अपने लोगों को, अपने आतंकियों को अपने काबू में रखिए, कड़ा संदेश दिया जाता उसके लिए। नहीं, ऐसा कुछ नहीं किया गया। अलबत्ता अब ऐसे स्टेटमेंट्स उस समय हमारे देश के द्वारा दिए गए थे। तो इस स्टेटमेंट को बरकरार रखने के लिए, शायद उन्हें एम्बेसडर ऑफ पीस बचाए रखने के लिए पाकिस्तान की ओर कुछ नहीं बोला गया, और इसका फल भी भुगतना पड़ा। आपको बता दें कि जब अपने दुश्मन को हम रिकॉग्नाइज तक ना कर पाएं तो क्या होता है, वो दुश्मन हमारे सर चढ़ जाता है। तो पहले हमारे देश में बम धमाके हुए, और आपको बता दें 2008 कोई सामान्य साल नहीं था एम्बेसडर ऑफ पीस घोषित करने के अलावा। 2008 में ये बम धमाके हुए गुजरात में। फिर उसके बाद हमारी हिस्ट्री का एक जो सबसे दिल दहलाने वाला जो कांड हुआ है भारत का, वो 26/11, जो किसी के भी दिमाग से आज तक हटा ही नहीं है। 26/11 के जो हमले हुए, उनके बाद भी हमारी गवर्नमेंट ने कोई कड़ा स्टांस, बहुत मजबूत स्टांस दिखाने में देखा जाए तो समर्थ नहीं रही। उसने थोड़ा बहुत पाकिस्तान को कंडेम किया, क्योंकि अब कोई रास्ता ही नहीं बचा, क्योंकि अब पाकिस्तान से ही बोट लेकर अगर आतंकी यहाँ आ रहे हैं तब तो आपके पास कोई मुंह नहीं बचता। लेकिन ये हालात बनाए गए, और कितनी बड़ी नाकामी हम कहेंगे गवर्नमेंट की, कि उस समय के तत्कालीन गवर्नमेंट की, एनडीए और कांग्रेस लेड जो थी, कि उन लोगों ने कुछ ज़्यादा हर एक तरीके से पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ कुछ कहने से बचते रहे, और उसका खामियाजा देश को इतना बुरे तरीके से भुगतना पड़ा। तो अब हालात ये हैं कि खुद जो कोर्ट है, जिसने इस अहमदाबाद के बम धमाके के मामलों को लेकर फैसला सुनाया है, उसकी ओर से इस बात से इनकार नहीं किया गया है कि इन बम धमाकों में जो आज के प्रधानमंत्री हैं नरेंद्र मोदी जी, जो कि उस समय गुजरात के सीएम हुआ करते थे, उनको निशाना बनाने की साजिश थी। तो देखा जाए तो कितनी गहरी साजिश चल रही है, और कितनी दूर की बातें, कितनी दूर के प्लान्स बनाए गए थे। हालांकि हमारा देश भी अपने आप में एक पूरा मशीनरी है, जिसमें पुलिस दल और अनेक खुफिया एजेंसियां काम करती रहती हैं। तो उनको पता होता है कि कौन सी चीज़ कब क्या खतरे लेकर आएगी। और सबसे दुखद बात ये रही, जिसके बारे में हमने पहले बात की, कि किस तरीके से खुफिया एजेंसियों की रिपोर्ट्स को इग्नोर किया गया और उन पर उचित कार्यवाही नहीं की गई। और हम जानते हैं कि इसके मामलों को लेकर कई रिपोर्ट्स भी आई थी कि इस तरीके के धमाकों को अंजाम देने की साजिश चल रही है। लेकिन किसकी खामी कहें, सरकार की खामी कह लें, कि किस तरीके से जो रिपोर्ट्स दी गई उनको दबा दिया गया, उन पर ध्यान नहीं दिया गया, और फिर ये बम धमाके हुए। तो उसकी खामियाजा हमें भुगतना पड़ा। खैर, आपको ये पता होना चाहिए कि जो दुश्मन देश है उसके खिलाफ कड़ी कार्रवाई करना कितना ज़रूरी है। जब 26/11 के हमले भी हुए, तब भी क्या कड़ी कार्रवाई की गई, केवल मुंह से बोलने के अलावा कोई नहीं जानता। तो इतनी बड़ी बड़ी हरकतें कर दी गई, तो और उसके जवाब में जब देश की ओर से, देश की जो सरकार है उसकी ओर से, लीडर्स की ओर से कड़ा संदेश ना दिया जाए दुश्मनों को, तो उससे बहुत मोरल डाउन होता है। खैर, इस मामले को लेकर शायद हम जानते हैं अब कि आज के भारत में लीडरशिप की कमी नहीं है, और किस तरीके से कड़े संदेश पाकिस्तान को पिछले कुछ सालों में दिए गए हैं। हम सभी जानते हैं कि किस तरीके से हवाई हमले हुए हैं और सर्जिकल स्ट्राइक्स हुई हैं। तो आज हमारे देश का एक नागरिक ये जानता है कि हमारी जो सरकार है, हमारे जो लीडर्स हैं, वो कोई भी हमला या देश की शान में कोई भी गुस्ताखी वो माफ़ नहीं करते। तो लंबे समय बाद न्याय आया है। 28 को सबूतों के अभाव में छोड़ दिया गया है और इसमें से 49 को सजा हुई है। 49 में से जो 38 हैं उनको फांसी की सज़ा सुनाई गई है। अब हमारे देश का तो कानून, हमारे देश की कानून व्यवस्था के बारे में हम सब जानते हैं। अभी इस फैसले को आगे भी अपील किया जाएगा और ये बात सुप्रीम कोर्ट तक पहुंचेगी। फिर उसके बाद अगर फांसी की सज़ाएं बरकरार रहीं तो राष्ट्रपति तक पहुंचेगी और ये सब होते होते 10 साल 12 साल और लग सकते हैं। तो कब वास्तव में जो उस बम धमाके से लोगों को, जो लोग आहत हुए थे, जिन लोगों की मृत्यु हुई, जो लोग घायल हुए, उनको न्याय कब मिलेगा? अब इसके बारे में तो हम कुछ कह नहीं सकते क्योंकि भारतीय न्याय व्यवस्था है भाई, और न्याय व्यवस्था के खिलाफ और न्याय व्यवस्था के बारे में क्या कहा जाए। और आज ये हालात बन चुके हैं। अब इसके बाद क्या होगा इसका खैर अब पूरा देश इंतज़ार करेगा ही कि वास्तव में ये सज़ा तो सुना दी गई है, लेकिन इसका अंजाम क्या होने वाला है। और ये एक, हम कह लें अच्छा समय है या बुरा समय, कुछ हम कह नहीं सकते, लेकिन देश में ये जो सज़ाएं आई हैं वास्तव में एक मौका है ये समझने का कि वास्तव में हमारे देश की कानून व्यवस्था काम तो कर रही है। खैर, और अब इस पूरे मामले को लेकर आगे क्या होगा उसकी खबरें हम आपके सामने और भी लेकर आएंगे। आप बने रहें न्यूज़ लाइव नाउ के साथ। लाइव खबर, लाइव असर।
Slow walk, take a little step in, respond what Western Europe and the rest of our allies, and then inch ultimately find some way to take control of the country. But it's unlikely this is going to be, and we've said this before, giant blitzkrieg because under instead, he's going to attempt to take it little by little, hoping that Ukraine, Western Europeans get tired of it, and the United States get tired of it.
माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी, उपस्थित माननीय राज्य मंत्रीगण, उद्योग, व्यापार एवं एकेडमिक जगत से जुड़े सभी एक्सपर्ट्स, विद्यालयों, विश्वविद्यालयों और राज्य सरकारों से जुड़े हमारे शिक्षक, छात्र एवं ऑफिशियल्स, आज के इस वेबिनार में आप सबका हार्दिक स्वागत है। आज का वेबिनार माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी द्वारा मार्गदर्शित इनोवेशन है। इसमें सभी प्रमुख स्टेक होल्डर्स को एक मंच पर लाकर परामर्श के माध्यम से डिजिटल यूनिवर्सिटी की स्थापना, 200 टीवी चैनल की लॉन्चिंग के लिए ज्ञान और अनुभव का आदान प्रदान, डिजिटल टीचर द्वारा ई कंटेंट और स्किल डेवलपमेंट का क्वालिटी ट्रांजैक्शन, अर्बन प्लानिंग में भारत की आवश्यकताओं की पूर्ति जैसे विषयों पर विचार किया जाएगा। इन सभी विषयों पर बजट 2022 में हुए अनाउंसमेंट्स को अमल करने के लिए एक टाइम बाउंड कार्यक्रम बनाने में सहायता मिलेगी। यह सभी प्रयास नई राष्ट्रीय शिक्षा नीति के एक्सेस, इक्विटी, क्वालिटी और अफोर्डेबिलिटी के उद्देश्यों को प्राप्त करने में सहायक होंगे। मैं धन्यवाद देना चाहूँगा माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी का कि उन्होंने अपने बिजी शेड्यूल में से हमारे लिए समय निकाला और हम सबको अपने विचारों से अवगत कराने की सहमति दी। अंत में मैं माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी से अनुरोध करूंगा कि वे हमारे मार्गदर्शन करें। आदरणीय प्रधानमंत्री जी।
move forces more quickly to where they are needed, and also to agree a statement
नमस्कार।
where we express a very strong condemnation of the Russian invasion.
केंद्रीय मंत्रिमंडल के मेरे सहयोगीगण, एजुकेशन, स्किल डेवलपमेंट, साइंस, टेक्नोलॉजी और रिसर्च से जुड़े सभी महानुभाव, देवी और सज्जनों, हमारी सरकार ने बजट से पहले और बजट के बाद स्टेक होल्डर्स के साथ चर्चा की, संवाद की एक विशेष परंपरा विकसित की है। आज का ये कार्यक्रम उसी की एक कड़ी है। इसी क्रम में आज शिक्षा और स्किल डेवलपमेंट को लेकर बजट में जो प्रावधान हुए हैं उस पर आप सभी स्टेक होल्डर्स से अलग अलग पहलुओं पर विस्तार से चर्चा होने वाली है। फ्रेंड्स, हमारी आज की युवा पीढ़ी देश के भविष्य की कर्णधार है, वहीं भविष्य के नेशन बिल्डर्स भी हैं। इसलिए आज की युवा पीढ़ी को एम्पावरिंग करने का मतलब है भारत के भविष्य को एम्पावर करना। इसी सोच के साथ 2022 के बजट में एजुकेशन सेक्टर से जुड़ी 5 बातों पर बहुत जोर दिया गया है। पहला, यूनिवर्सलाइजेशन ऑफ क्वालिटी एजुकेशन। हमारी शिक्षा व्यवस्था का विस्तार हो, उसकी क्वालिटी सुधरे और एजुकेशन सेक्टर की क्षमता बढ़े, इसके लिए अहम निर्णय लिए गए हैं। दूसरा है स्किल डेवलपमेंट। देश में डिजिटल स्किलिंग इकोसिस्टम बने, इंडस्ट्री 4.0 की जब चर्चा चल रही है तो इंडस्ट्री की डिमांड के हिसाब से स्किल डेवलपमेंट हो, इंडस्ट्री लिंकेज बेहतर हो, इस पर ध्यान दिया गया है। तीसरा महत्वपूर्ण पक्ष है अर्बन प्लानिंग और डिजाइन। इसमें भारत का जो पुरातन अनुभव और ज्ञान है उसे हमारी आज की शिक्षा में समाहित किया जाना आवश्यक है। चौथा अहम पक्ष है इंटरनेशनलाइजेशन। भारत में वर्ल्ड क्लास विदेशी यूनिवर्सिटियां आए, जो हमारे औद्योगिक क्षेत्र हैं, जैसे गिफ्ट सिटी है, वहां फिनटेक से जुड़े संस्थान आए, इसे भी प्रोत्साहित किया जाए। पांचवा महत्वपूर्ण पक्ष है एवीजीसी, यानी एनिमेशन, विजुअल इफेक्ट्स, गेमिंग, कॉमिक। इन सभी में रोजगार की अपार संभावनाएं हैं। एक बहुत बड़ा ग्लोबल मार्केट है। इसे पूरा करने के लिए हम भारतीय टैलेंट का कैसे इस्तेमाल बढ़ाएं, इस पर भी उतना ही ध्यान दिया गया है। ये बजट नई नेशनल एजुकेशन पॉलिसी को जमीन पर उतारने में बहुत मदद करने वाला है। साथियों, कोरोना आने से काफी पहले से देश में मैंने अनेक बार डिजिटल फ्यूचर की बात करता रहा हूं। जब हम अपने गांवों को ऑप्टिकल फाइबर से जोड़ रहे हैं, जब हम डेटा की कीमत कम से कम रखने के प्रयास कर रहे थे, कनेक्टिविटी से जुड़े इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर को सुधार रहे थे, तो कुछ लोग सवाल उठाते थे कि इसकी जरूरत क्या है। लेकिन महामारी के समय में हमारे इन प्रयासों की अहमियत को सबने देख लिया है। ये डिजिटल कनेक्टिविटी ही है जिसने वैश्विक महामारी के इस समय हमारी शिक्षा व्यवस्था को बचाए रखा। हम देख रहे हैं कि कैसे भारत में तेजी से डिजिटल डिवाइड कम हो रहा है। इनोवेशन हमारे यहां इंक्लूजन सुनिश्चित कर रहा है और अब तो देश इंक्लूजन से भी आगे बढ़कर इंटीग्रेशन की तरफ जा रहा है। इस दशक में हम जो आधुनिकता शिक्षा व्यवस्था में लाना चाहते हैं, उसके आधार को मजबूत करने के लिए इस साल के बजट में कई घोषणाएं की गई हैं। डिजिटल एजुकेशन डिजिटल फ्यूचर की तरफ बढ़ते भारत के व्यापक विजन का हिस्सा है। इसलिए ई विद्या हो, वन क्लास वन चैनल हो, डिजिटल लैब्स हो, डिजिटल यूनिवर्सिटीज हो, ऐसा एजुकेशनल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर युवाओं को बहुत मदद करने वाला है। ये भारत के सोशियो इकोनॉमिक सेटअप में गांव हो, गरीब हो, दलित, पिछड़े, आदिवासी सभी को शिक्षा के बेहतर समाधान देने का प्रयास है। साथियों, नेशनल डिजिटल यूनिवर्सिटी भारत की शिक्षा व्यवस्था में अपनी तरह का अनोखा और अभूतपूर्व कदम है। ये डिजिटल यूनिवर्सिटी में वो ताकत देख रहा हूं कि ये यूनिवर्सिटी हमारे देश में सीटों की जो समस्या होती है उसे पूरी तरह समाधान दे सकती है। जब हर विषय के लिए अनलिमिटेड सीट्स होगी तो आप कल्पना कर सकते हैं कि कितना बड़ा परिवर्तन शिक्षा जगत में आ जाएगा। ये डिजिटल यूनिवर्सिटी लर्निंग और रीलर्निंग की मौजूदा और भविष्य की जरूरतों के लिए युवाओं को तैयार करेगी। शिक्षा मंत्रालय, यूजीसी, एआईसीटीई और सभी स्टेक होल्डर्स, सबसे मेरा आग्रह है कि ये डिजिटल यूनिवर्सिटी तेजी से काम शुरू कर सके, ये सुनिश्चित होना चाहिए। शुरू से ही ये डिजिटल यूनिवर्सिटी इंटरनेशनल स्टैंडर्ड को लेकर चले, ये देखना हम सभी का दायित्व है। साथियों, देश में ही ग्लोबल स्टैंडर्ड के इंस्टीट्यूट्स का निर्माण करने का सरकार का इंटेंट और उसके लिए पॉलिसी फ्रेमवर्क भी आपके सामने है। अब आपको अपने प्रयासों से इस इंटेंट को जमीन पर उतारना है। आज विश्व मातृभाषा दिवस भी है। मातृभाषा में शिक्षा बच्चों के मानसिक विकास से जुड़ी है। अनेक राज्यों में स्थानीय भाषाओं में मेडिकल और टेक्निकल एजुकेशन की पढ़ाई शुरू हो चुकी है। अब सभी शिक्षाविदों की ये विशेष जिम्मेदारी है कि स्थानीय भारतीय भाषाओं में बेस्ट कंटेंट और उसके डिजिटल वर्जन के निर्माण को गति दी जाए। भारतीय भाषाओं में ये ई कंटेंट इंटरनेट, मोबाइल फोन, टीवी और रेडियो के माध्यम से सभी के लिए एक्सेस हो, इस पर काम करना है। भारतीय साइन लैंग्वेज में भी हम ऐसे पाठ्यक्रम विकसित कर रहे हैं जो दिव्यांग युवाओं को सशक्त कर रहे हैं। इसमें भी
mainly trying to prevent Russia from attacking. We are shared in
26 जुलाई 2008 को अहमदाबाद शहर, गुजरात का अहमदाबाद शहर धमाकों से दहल उठा। एक के बाद एक लगातार 21 धमाके।
these absolutely false claims of genocide against Russians, or the alleged sabotage actions inside Russia and so on. It is false. It is staged, but we exposed those attempts because we hoped that could reduce the risk of a military invasion. We have seen that they have stick to their plans. They have done as they actually planned for a long time ago, and we need to understand that throughout all these weeks and months, when they said that they have no plans of invading Ukraine, they had plans, and they were not only having plans, but they actually built up all these forces with one clear aim, that was to invade Ukraine. And despite that, they were telling us and the world and the public that we have no plans to invade Ukraine. Yes, they had plans, and now we have seen that actually they were serious about invading Ukraine all the time, never serious about really engaging in diplomatic efforts. What we see now is a full-fledged invasion of Ukraine from multiple directions. We see air, land and naval forces taking part in those attacks. It's too early, we don't have a full damage assessment yet, but this is extremely serious. It's an attack on a peaceful, sovereign, independent nation, and it is a war of a type and a scale we actually thought was part of history in Europe, but now it's back in real, and it's imposing enormous suffering on innocent people in Ukraine.
Thank you very much. This concludes this press conference.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is the third time in a row that Russian presidency has not allowed us to speak under the Rule 37. And so, as PR of Estonia, I am delivering this statement here on behalf of the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and my own country, Estonia. We welcome and underline the urgency of today's emergency meeting on the UN Security Council, the fourth over the last 4 weeks, to discuss the latest developments concerning Russia's further aggression against Ukraine. We thank the Secretary General and Under-Secretary General Di Carlo for their briefings. The Council was convening as we witness yet another escalatory step as a result of a deliberate policy of aggression by the Russian leadership, and that has led us to this conflict. We unequivocally condemn the announcement by President Putin and the military operation in Ukraine. It is unprovoked and unlawful act of aggression. Ukraine is facing a repeated violation of its territorial integrity after the illegal annexation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol in 2014. Acts of aggression and the use of force are violations of international law, including the UN Charter that require accountability. We call on all UN member states and UN bodies to prevent the pending war and put a stop to the violations against the state and people of Ukraine. The request for military assistance by Moscow from the so-called People's Republics of Donetsk and Luhansk announces a very dangerous additional step against Ukraine's sovereignty. It would risk thousands of lives. It follows the decision by President Putin to recognize the non-government controlled areas of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts of Ukraine as independent entities and the ensuing decision to send Russian troops into these areas, preceded by the unprecedented buildup of troops on Ukraine's border. We have strongly condemned these decisions as blatant breaches of international law, including the UN Charter, as well as of the Minsk agreements. We heard numerous similar messages of condemnation and concern from among countries around the world, across all regional groups at the General Assembly today. We have heard from the UN Secretary General, who stated that the decision of the Russian Federation to recognize the so-called independence of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions is a violation of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, and inconsistent with the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. It undermines the United Nations itself. The UN should not share the fate of the League of Nations. The Secretary General also made clear his concern about the perversion of the concept of peacekeeping. Troops entering the territory of another country without its consent are not impartial peacekeepers, nor are they peacekeepers at all, as he pointed out. They are called invaders. Yet we note today that these persistent calls for the respect of international law, diplomacy and dialogue continue to be unheeded. We underline that the Russian Federation's use of force against Ukraine is completely unjustified and unacceptable. It must be met with unity, firmness, and determination in solidarity with Ukraine. The European Union has responded to the latest violations, including with additional restrictive measures. We stand ready to adopt more wide-ranging political and economic sanctions. Russia's actions against Ukraine are not a matter just for Ukraine or for Europe. They have severe implications globally for every UN member state and the rules-based international order. We urge the Russian Federation, as a party to the conflict, to reverse the recognition of the so-called People's Republics, uphold its commitments, abide by international law, and return to the discussions within the Normandy format and the Trilateral Contact Group. It has a clear responsibility under international law to work to find a peaceful settlement of the conflict. We strongly urge Russia to respect the principles of the UN Charter, to refrain from any further escalatory actions, and to engage in meaningful diplomacy. We reiterate the unwavering support of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania for Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. We, with the international community, stand in solidarity with Ukraine. Thank you.
Good evening. The Secretary General will make some remarks, and then we'll take a few questions. Thank you. Sir.
This is the saddest moment in my tenure as Secretary General of the United Nations. I started this meeting of the Security Council addressing President Putin and telling him from the bottom of my heart, stop your troops from an offensive to Ukraine, give peace a chance, because too many people have already died. During the meeting, President Putin announced a special military operation in the Donbass and required the Ukrainian troops to lay down their arms. So in the present circumstances, I must change my appeal. And I must say, President Putin, in the name of humanity, bring your troops back to Russia. In the name of humanity, do not allow to start in Europe what could be the worst war since the beginning of the century, with consequences not only devastating for Ukraine, not only tragic for the Russian Federation, but with an impact we cannot even foresee in relation to their consequences for the global economy in a moment when we are emerging from the COVID, and so many developing countries absolutely need to have space for the recovery, which would be very, very difficult with high prices of oil, with the end of exports of wheat from the Ukraine, and with rising interest rates caused by the instability in international markets. This conflict must stop now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. You've just talked about consequences. I wonder if you could spell out some more what you think the consequences will be for Russia and for Ukraine and its people.
Well, it's clear that military action will be happening in the territory of the Ukraine. And obviously, if they lead to a generalized war, it is difficult to forecast how dramatic it will be in the number of people who will die, in the number of people who will be displaced, in the number of people who will lose hope in relation to the future. It is also clear that the consequences for the Russian Federation will be very meaningful. It's not for me to comment on sanctions that are being implemented, but it's clear that there will be also consequences. But what is clear for me is that this war doesn't make any sense. It violates the principles of the Charter, and it causes, or will cause, if it doesn't stop, a level of suffering Europe has not known since at least the Balkanic crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Pam Falk from CBS News. Is there anything the UN can do to get Russia back to the bargaining table at this point?
We can, of course, in my case, appeal. The Security Council is the body that has the powers given by the Charter to address this situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, as you read and you heard in the Security Council chamber, the Russian war started against Ukraine. In fact, the war started in 2014. It's a historical embarrassment to the humanity and to this particular organization that has failed to take the necessary actions in the course of the last 8 years. I demanded in the Security Council that Ambassador Nebenzia of Russia relinquish his responsibilities as the chair, as the president of the Security Council, as a representative of a country that egregiously violated the Charter, that he pass his duties to someone in the Security Council who is capable to perform the duties of the President of the Council. I'm looking forward to tomorrow's meeting of the Security Council, where an appropriate draft resolution will be put to vote, and I call to everyone to vote in favor. The design of the United Nations is very faulty. You can ask an aggressor to abstain from vote at the stage of peaceful resolution under Chapter 6, but you cannot ask aggressor, believe it or not, to abstain from vote under Chapter 7 when the Council deals with the aggression. I have also asked the Secretary General of the United Nations to produce the copies of the decisions of the Security Council and the General Assembly dated 1991 that, in accordance with Article 4 of the Charter, welcome the desire of the Russian Federation to be a member of this organization. Thank you.
Ambassador, you were visibly emotional during this speech. You mentioned the fact that most of your speech was obsolete by the time you had the chance to read it. What is the message to the world at this moment? As we heard from Russia, the fact that a special operation in Donbass was launched, but we hear that is bombing and explosions in Kyiv, that special forces from the Black Sea started to enter Ukrainian territory. And personally, what's your feeling? You have family, you have people in Ukraine right now.
Well, it's a war. If we here in New York do not remember what war is, then go to the library and pull out the footage of the war. It means thousands and thousands of people killed, if not millions. And what I want from the world, I want the world to rally, after all, and defend the world from the aggression, from the Russian Federation. All right, it's late. We have to digest the information, we have to verify information, and we have to be here in the Security Council tomorrow morning.
Ambassador, just last question. At the end of the speech, the ambassador of Russia says that this wasn't an aggression against the Ukrainian people, but an aggression against those that were in power. Do you believe that this is a flat-out...
You can't be serious. Are you serious? You want me to dissect the crazy, lunatic semantics of a person whose president violates the Charter, whose president declared the war, and he's playing with words? And you ask me to interpret it? It's lunacy. It's lunacy. Absolutely.
afternoon. Russia has attacked Ukraine. This is a brutal act of war. Our thoughts are with the brave people of Ukraine. Sadly, what we have warned against for months has come to pass. Despite all calls on Russia to change course and tireless efforts to seek a diplomatic solution, peace on our continent has been shattered. We now have war in Europe on a scale and of a type we thought belonged to history. We have just finished a meeting of the North Atlantic Council to discuss the situation. The Council also addressed the request by Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia to hold urgent consultations under Article 4 of the Washington Treaty. This is a grave moment for the security of Europe. Russia's unjustified and unprovoked attack on Ukraine is putting countless innocent lives at risk. With air and missile attacks, ground forces and special forces from multiple directions, targeting military infrastructure and major urban centers. This is a deliberate, cold-blooded and long-planned invasion. Despite its litany of lies, denials and disinformation, the Kremlin's intentions are clear for the world to see. Russia's leaders bear full responsibility for their reckless actions and the lives lost. NATO allies condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine in the strongest possible terms. It is a blatant violation of international law, an act of aggression against a sovereign, independent and peaceful country, and a serious threat to Euro-Atlantic security. We call on Russia to immediately cease its military action, withdraw its forces from Ukraine, and choose diplomacy. We fully support Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and Ukraine's right to self-defense. Russia is using force to try to rewrite history and deny Ukraine its free and independent path. NATO's core task is to protect and defend all allies. There must be no room for miscalculation or misunderstanding. An attack on one will be regarded as an attack on all. This is our collective security guarantee. Today, the North Atlantic Council decided to activate our defense plans at the request of our top military commander, General Todd Walters. This is a prudent and defensive step to protect and shield allied nations during this crisis. And it will enable us to deploy capabilities and forces, including the NATO response force, to where they are needed. In response to Russia's massive military build-up, we have already strengthened our collective defense, on land, at sea and in the air. In the last weeks, allies from North America and Europe have deployed thousands or more troops to the eastern part of the alliance and placed more on standby. We have over 100 jets at high alert, protecting our airspace, and more than 120 allied ships at sea from the high north to the Mediterranean. All this shows that our collective defense commitment, Article 5, is ironclad. We will continue to do whatever is necessary to shield the alliance from aggression. I have called a virtual summit of NATO leaders tomorrow to address the way forward. Russia is now facing severe costs and consequences imposed by the whole international community. The Kremlin's aim is to re-establish its sphere of influence, rip up the global rules that have kept us all safe for decades, and subvert the values that we hold dear. This is the new normal for our security. Peace cannot be taken for granted. Freedom and democracy are contested by authoritarian regimes, and strategic competition is on the rise. We must respond with renewed resolve and even stronger unity. North America and Europe together in NATO. We are an alliance of 30 democracies standing as one. We will protect our people and our values. Democracy will always prevail over autocracy. Freedom will always prevail over oppression. And then I'm ready to take your questions.
We'll go to Interfax Ukraine.
Thank you, Anna. Interfax Ukraine, Irina Sommer. Secretary General, we all know that NATO will not fight for Ukraine, but don't you think it's time for NATO to build anti-Putin coalition? Thank you.
NATO stands in solidarity with Ukraine, and NATO allies are imposing severe costs on Russia for the reckless invasion of Ukraine. NATO allies, in close coordination with the European Union and other partners all over the world, are now imposing severe economic sanctions on Russia to demonstrate that we follow up on what we said, and that is that it will be a high price for Russia to pay. NATO allies have also over a long period of time provided support, practical support, military support to Ukraine, and helped them to build a much stronger, much better equipped, much better trained armed force today than the Ukraine had in 2014. And I would like to recognize the professionalism and the bravery of the Ukrainian men and women in uniform who are now standing up against the Russian invasion. So we continue to stand together, condemning the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and allies stand together also in sending a message that we will never accept the brutal violation of international law that we see taking place as Russia now invades Ukraine.
We'll go to Bloomberg.
That shows that NATO allies face a direct threat from Russia at the moment, and would NATO reconsider military intervention in Ukraine? Thank you.
So NATO is the strongest alliance in history, and make no mistake, we will defend and protect every ally against any attack and every inch of NATO territory. And that's the reason also we have increased our presence in the eastern part of the alliance with thousands of more troops, ships and planes over the last weeks to send a very clear message that an attack on one ally will trigger the response of the whole alliance. And we do so not to provoke a conflict, but to prevent a conflict. What we do is defensive, it's prudent, it's measured, but it is necessary because we see the aggressive actions of Russia against Ukraine, and therefore allies also have to make sure that there is no room for any misunderstanding about that Russia can do anything like that against a NATO allied country.
National Public Radio.
Thank you. Terry Schultz with NPR and DW. Mr. Secretary General, in the NAC statement, you say that we're deploying additional defensive land and air forces to the eastern part of the alliance, additional maritime assets, and increase the readiness of forces. Is this now, today, more forces being sent as a result of the fact that the invasion has now happened, or are you there referring to what has already been done as reinforcements? I understand SACEUR will now have the ability to assemble the VJTF without coming back to the NAT for approval? And finally, are you still willing to sit down with President Putin or other representatives of the Russian government after this? Or are you suspending your offer to hold talks on other issues and the NATO-Russia Council? Thank you.
This invasion doesn't come as a surprise. We have warned against it for months. And sadly, what happened this morning during the night was something that Allied security and intelligence services have predicted for a long time. We have tried to prevent it by calling Russia to engage in diplomatic efforts, by telling Russia that there will be severe costs, economic sanctions, if they invade Ukraine further. But what happened over the last hours, what has happened over the last hours, demonstrate that Russia, despite our diplomatic efforts and despite our clear message of economic sanctions, decided to once again invade Ukraine. But since we have been warning against this for a long period of time, we have also taken prudent measures to prepare ourselves. And that's the reason why we, over the last months and weeks, have significantly increased the presence of NATO troops in the eastern part of the alliance. More land troops, ground forces, but also air and naval forces. In the coming days and weeks, there will come even more. So we will further increase, and we are increasing, our presence in the eastern part of the alliance. And today we activated NATO's defense plans that gives our military commanders more authority to move forces and to deploy forces when needed. And of course this will also be elements of the NATO response force. So we are ready, we are adjusting our posture, but what we do is defensive, is measured, and we don't seek confrontation. We want to prevent the conflict and any attack against any NATO allied country.
And for talks, will you still sit down and talk?
Well, we have reached out to Russia for weeks and months, and what we've seen is that the Russian message has been that they actually have never taken these talks seriously. Because while we were trying to find a political solution, they were planning for this invasion. And while we were trying to find a political solution, they were actually day by day, week by week, increasing their military presence and readiness on the borders of Ukraine, and now the launched invasion. So Russia has shut the door to a political solution. We regret that, but that's sadly the reality, which has severe and very serious consequences for the people of Ukraine, but also actually impacts the security for all of us. And that's the reason why we step up our presence in the eastern part of the island.